last Thursday we had some snow, the first time around this time of year in the Boston area. Today I want to share a story that happened to me on the 7th of December during my training in the operating theater. And this incident here I have, it kind of reflects the whole healthcare training system in general in the United States, rather than from an individualistic experience that I had. So last Friday was probably not the best day in my operating theater training. I had a very poor preceptor who was a surgical technologist, and I was training how to scrub, and he didn't do a good job teaching at all. He behaved very unprofessionally. He put me in situations where I wasn't supposed to be in during my stage of training, and he just kept on pushing my buttons and questioning me about the practices I've learned and how they were all wrong and how he would correct them. It got to the point where I just almost kind of broke down crying, literally in front of the surgery while the surgery was taking place. Luckily, that didn't happen though. And luckily, I was able to retain myself for the most part. I did at the very end when he kept on pounding me and rushing me and making me focusing more on the satisfaction of the surgeons and himself rather than the patient. I think I just kind of snapped, but not in a very explosive way. I just quietly told him this is the way I was taught. I don't like it when my boundaries like this are crossed. He didn't really become moved by it, which was surprising. But the surgeon that was next to me, she thought that I was arguing with him, and she was concerned about both of us during the surgery. So throughout the day, he didn't do a really good job precepting. I talked to my charge nurse twice the same day. Once in the morning after I had a few cases with him, and then once in the afternoon after the surgeon told the charge nurse about this conflict me and my preceptor were having in the operating theater. I remember when I talked to my charge nurse the second time, he told me that it was very unfortunate that I had to go through this, but one of the sad realities is whenever you're in healthcare, regardless of the profession you're in, you are going to have people that just don't care about you, and they are going to eat you up mentally, emotionally. They are going to try to break you down and build you back up in their own perception. Basically, what I'm trying to summarize is I was kind of taken advantage of that day. Also, the circular nurse during that time, she was very unhelpful as well, too rushy. I remember her calling me Muhammad one time, which I don't like Muhammad. I hate that name and I hate what Muhammad stands for, but she called me that name and that just really pissed me off. But I was able to control it. But her, my preceptor, who was a surgical tech, they were all having like a laugh and kick at it. It wasn't a really good day that day. That's, I think, why at the very end I ended up just not telling my preceptor directly, but I did tell my charge nurse. The good news about this whole thing is it did get resolved. So in the future, my charge nurse now knows not to pair me up with them because of the very difficult time I had last Friday. It didn't have a good mood going into the weekend. I was very stressed out, and my biggest concern is the surgeon who was concerned about me. My hopes is that she doesn't think I'm a bad person based off of that one experience that she didn't have the full knowledge of to the extent of what that preceptor had done. I talked about it with my charge nurse. He told me that there have been instances where back in the day it was much more worse when it came to people being mistreated like this, psychologically, emotionally, and being called at and profiled and stuff like this, and also being taken advantage of. But he said it's gotten better. But he did tell me in the future you might run into incidents like this no matter where you go and what you do. Whenever you're with other human beings, that's just the way things are. I remember I was talking to my friend about this after the incident, and he said the way I envision people is a very idealistic manner. And he said I am an idealist sometimes, meaning that I expect everybody's going to behave the same way based off of a certain policy, procedure, or rule that is applicable to everyone. But I realized I need to be a bit more realistic with things because not everybody's going to follow these things. I just wanted to share the story because I just wanted to kind of be a voice to other people out there that have gone through this, there are going to be days where it's just where you're going to have a bad day. You might go home crying, or you might go home super angry, or both. But it's very unfortunate, and things like this should never happen, or they should never even occur. These things should be like never incidents. The reality is that's just not the case. The whole notion of healthcare professionals eating their young is still very prevalent and very common in the hospital. And this is the biggest issue, I think, with the United States' system of training. My preceptor that day, who was saying everything I've learned was wrong, and he just made my day miserable. He was a surgical tech for 20 years in the military, so he was taught a very different perspective on things versus me, fresh out of my school. People in healthcare that are in the older generation don't understand the struggles and the training that the newer generation of healthcare professionals learn. And when the newer generations become experienced and they become the older generation later on, they need to be open and receptive to the following generation taking place. Unfortunately, healthcare in the United States is still very much catered to the older generations and is very resistant to change. And if you try to change something in a hospital, you are going to be met with a lot of backlash emotionally, psychologically, or even legally in some cases. And this has to stop. I know it's not going to be 100%. This is the pattern that the United States healthcare system follows. And as a model for the rest of the world, it is absolutely outrageous sometimes the way that healthcare and healthcare trainees undergo, especially new ones, due to the older generation of healthcare professionals not caring about the new things you're learning and giving you a hard time and trying to acclimate to their old school ways, when in reality it should be the exact opposite. Healthcare should start with the current and most up-to-date generation and should constantly change all the time. Realistically, it may not be feasible very quickly because of costs and money and infrastructure, but that's the direction it has to go in. And I unfortunately was at the end of that stick last Friday. So to any veterinarian, physician, nurse practitioner, physician assistant, pharmacist, dentist, you name it, any healthcare professional going through these things, it's important to speak up and understand to never be taken advantage of and not have the values that you were trained to make this system a better system for all compromised or be taken advantage of by other healthcare professionals in the older generation. I am very pessimistic about the United States' future on healthcare, and I doubt it's going to be better anytime soon. There's so many systematic issues with the United States healthcare system that it deserves its own separate video and its own separate discussion on it. Luckily, because I'm not with him anymore, I had a great week this week, and I've spoken to other nurses and other surgical techs within my training, and they said based on where I am currently, I am meeting and at many times exceeding the level of expectations for me. It's really reassuring. Just because one circular nurse or one surgical tech that day thought that I was doing a very terrible job and I wasn't hustling enough, it's good to know that everybody else thinks the exact opposite. Many thanks, and as always, cheers.